Hi students, we will be finishing up chapter 7 today. So we've been talking about the human population, we've been talking about descriptors for the human population, important aspects of it, how to evaluate social, economic, and environmental factors. We've been talking about relationships between different populations, and we've been trying to figure out exactly what is Earth's carrying capacity and what are possible implications for our future population based on that information. One of the few things that we have had to emphasize was the population growth and what impacts population growth, what adds to population growth, and what takes away from population growth. We've talked about the study of populations, and we've talked about how to calculate the doubling time of a population. So we talked about the law of 70. We've talked about some other things that could possibly impact population growth, like total fertility rate. We've talked about projected world population growth. We've talked about how life expectancy and the age at which women give birth to children can impact population growth. We've talked a little bit about migration. Like I said, we've talked about things that add to populations and things that take away from them. We also talked about age structure diagrams, and we took a look at what happens in a developing country versus a country that is well developed, and we're going to actually be emphasizing that type of information today. So the first thing that I was going to do was I was going to clarify that in an age structure diagram, what you're looking at is the non-reproductive age individuals, the reproductive age individuals, and the aging individuals. And so we have three major groups here, and if you have more babies than you have reproducers, then that means that when these guys move up to here, you're going to have more people to actually have more babies. And so the population is going to display very fast growth. When you have a situation like this, you've got some pretty steady development of the population at this point. And this doesn't mean that the population's not growing. This population is growing. It just means that the rate of growth has decreased or is leveling off. Here, you can see a population that is decreasing. So each generation is having less offspring than the generation before it. So these age structure diagrams are really good to help us predict about future population growth and what's going to happen to the rate of growth in that particular population. So based on those future projections, we can possibly come up with some ideas based on our models for carrying capacity for our planet and the conception of different types of populations. We can come up with some predictions about what's going to happen in the future. The first thing that I need to talk to you about, however, is we're going to talk about demographic transitions and economic development and what that means for future generations. We're also going to talk about resource consumption by different types of populations and cultures, and then we'll talk about sustainable development and why that is the goal. The theory of demographic transition pretty much states that the phases through which a population goes, or the human population goes, has shown a predictable pattern. And using those patterns, we can make some projections about specific countries and where they're at in the demographic transition and what's going to happen in their futures. So if we think about it, you've got phase 1, and in phase 1 you have a high birth rate, but you also have a high death rate. And this typically is an indicator of a non-industrialized society. So you have lots of babies because you're typically an agricultural society and you need the manpower, but then also you don't have well-developed health or technology that aids in a long lifespan. And so you have this problem of a high death or mortality rate for your infants. In phase two, You still have a high birth rate because culturally you feel like you need that manpower, but you're starting to develop. And so because that country is starting to develop, you see healthcare improvements and you see other changes that increase the lifespan of the individual. Because of that, you're going to experience huge population growth. In the third phase, the birth rate is going to start to decline. And the death rate is also going to heavily decline. However, your population is still increasing. Okay, so you're still increasing in your population just because of the momentum of the previous generations before. Then you go into phase 4. In phase 4, the population stops growing and you're typically at a static growth rate. So we're at 0% growth, or ZPG, and you're not growing one way or another. Some people suggest that there's a 5th phase, and in the 5th phase, in highly developed countries that are mature socially, that you actually show a decline in the growth rate, and then it steadies back into a stable 0 PG, but below the carrying capacity for that particular country. So how is it that countries modify their particular growth rate? Well, there's lots of different established methods for doing so. One is the allowing or the encouraging of contraceptive use, but the biggest deterrent to population growth is family planning through feminine education. And so if you educate the women, they have a tendency to have less babies because they're otherwise occupied either in a job or in some sort of educational hobby. Although population size is very important in understanding how a specific country is going to use our Earth's resources, that's not the only impact. So consumption of a country of our Earth's resources isn't just based on population, it's also based on economic development and culture. Here you can see that China has the largest population of any country, and India is not far behind. In fact, I think India is going to surpass here pretty soon. The United States is 3rd in population. However, if you look at resource use, the United States is leading in the resource use of our entire planet. So what does that mean? It means that although we don't have the largest population, our consumer culture of using disposable resources or considering resources to be disposable has had an impact on global resource use. So how do we figure out resource use and lifestyle and how that can impact our planet? Well, the way that we figure that out is by using the IPAT equation, and it's just used to estimate the impact of a human lifestyle on the environment. Impact is equal to the population times the affluence of that particular population times the non-sustainable technology. To reiterate part of what I've said and to illustrate the IPAT equation, I'd like you to listen to Mr. Anderson.
Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and this is Environmental Science Video 15. It's on human population impacts. A model we've used so far this year is this idea that the Earth supports society, which is driven by economy. But do all the countries on our planet impact the environment in the same way? So this map right now, if we impose it on a NASA simulation, so this is going to be the amount of carbon dioxide that's produced, you'll see that we're producing way more carbon dioxide in red in the northern hemisphere. North America and West.
Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and this is Environmental Science Video 15. It's on human population impacts. A model we've used so far this year is this idea that the Earth supports society, which is driven by economy. But do all the countries on our planet impact the environment in the same way? So this map right now, if we impose it on a NASA simulation, so this is going to be the amount of carbon dioxide that's produced, you'll see that we're producing way more carbon dioxide in red in the northern hemisphere. In North America and Western Europe and Southeast Asia, we have higher amounts of carbon dioxide. We're burning more of those fossil fuels. Not so much in the southern hemisphere. You can see the winds moving it around. But watch what happens. We're in May right now. Watch what happens as we move into June, and then as we move into July. The carbon dioxide levels are dropping off. Now we still have industry. It's just that it's summer. The leaves come out, they do photosynthesis, and they take in that carbon dioxide. Watch what happens now as we move into October and the leaves start to fall, that carbon dioxide comes back again. And so it's not equal impact to the environment. So we've learned so far that with industrialization, you see exponential growth in a population. And so the population increases in that is impacting the environment. But it's not only the number of people, it's the affluence of those people. It's how much they're consuming. It's also their technology. Now, some technology can actually help the environment. And so I'm talking about destructive technology. It's impacting the environment. One way to measure that is using the iPad equation. You don't actually have to calculate it, but it's combining these three things: the population, the affluence, and the destructive technology. An analogous model is the ecological footprint. It measures how much of the earth do we need to support that industry. Now, these are feedback loops, and so all of these are going to put impacts on the population itself. Another big one, aside from population, is the economy. If the economy grows too much, that is going to consume resources and destroy habitat. But if the economy is not big enough in certain countries, it can lead to disease and hunger. And so the iPad equation looks like this. It's pretty easy. On the left side, we have the impact. We then have the population. So in other words, the bigger the population is, the larger the impact. If we're looking at affluence, that's going to be consumption per person. So if you have a house and several TVs and many cars, you're probably going to have more affluence than somebody who lives in a village in Africa. And then, is that consumption actually harming the environment or impacting it? Well, it depends on what technology that is. And so let's give you an example. So let's look at a country. So this is Burundi. It's in the Rift Valley of Africa. And so if we look at their population, there are about 9 million people that live there. So there's going to be a certain impact. If we look at how much money they make, the average person makes $910 per year. What does that mean? They don't get much money, so there can't be much consumption. If we were to look at the major industry, it's going to be agriculture. Meat is rare because it's going to be highly expensive. If we look at transportation, bicycles are really common. And so is there a huge impact in Burundi on the environment? No, it's going to be relatively low. But if we look at another country, so this is the UAE or the United Arab Emirates, their population is 9 million as well. If we start to look at their consumption, however, the average person there makes 50 times what somebody in Burundi makes. What does that mean? There's a lot more consumption per person. If we look at their technology, this is Dubai, you can see there's way more technology, way more burning of fossil fuels. There's going to be a greater impact on the environment. If we look at Burundi, this is the capital of Burundi. You can see there's not a lot of industry, and so that means it's going to have a really small footprint. It doesn't consume much of the Earth's area. If we look at something like UAE, there's way more industry. And so if we were to put values to this, the ecological footprint of Burundi is going to be less than 1 global hectare per person. It's going to be relatively small. If we look at it what it is in the UAE, it's going to be about 12 times that. That means it's going to have a larger ecological footprint. It's going to consume more of the Earth's resources. So this graph is kind of interesting. On the bottom we have the ecological footprint, and on the right side we have a development index. So these are going to be the developing countries, and these are going to be the developed countries. So the US is going to have high development index, it's highly developed, and it's also going to have a very large ecological footprint. And so where do you think the UAE is going to be? It's going to be way out here. So it's going to have a high footprint, and it's going to be highly developed. It has more impact on our planet. It's got a larger economy. If we were to say, where's Burundi going to be? It's going to be way down here. It's a developing nation. And so you can see the general trend is as countries develop, they'll move up, and then they'll move across, and that means they're going to start to have more of an impact on the planet. Now this line is interesting. This line right here at 2.1 global hectares per person is the biocapacity. It's what our Earth can support. And so you can see that a lot of countries countries are actually exceeding that. And so going back to our model again, it's the society and the economy. And so as the population gets larger, we're going to have population effects on the environment. But the economy can affect it as well. If the economy is too large, then we have too much of an impact. But if it's too small, that can impact the society itself. To illustrate how the population and the economy can impact the environment and therefore the population, we're going to use worldmapper.org. It's a great website. And so let me show you what you can do. So this is a map of the world with all the countries. What you can do is you can change the size to represent another characteristic. So this is what the Earth would look like if the countries represented the actual population. So you can see that someplace like Canada shrinks, but China and India and Pakistan are going to get much larger, and that's because they have a really high population. If we were to look at poverty, watch what happens. Well, America shrinks to almost nothing, same with Western Europe, but we can see high poverty in India, some poverty in China, and we have high poverty in Africa. And so this is going to impact the people. And so if we look at hunger, for example, we're going to have high undernourishment in Africa, and we're going to have high undernourishment in India. It has that double hit of a high population and high poverty. We could also look at health. And so this is health, public spending, and you can see it's going to be much greater in America and in Japan and in Western Europe. Well, how does that impact disease, for example? This is going to be the HIV prevalence. You can see it's going to be low in areas like Japan, but incredibly high where we're not spending much money on public health. So incredibly high. In certain areas of Africa, it's 2 and sometimes 3 out of 10 adults are going to have HIV. If we look at income, we see that inverse relationship where we're going to see the developed nations having a higher income, especially like Western Europe and the United States. How does that impact ecological footprint? It's going to be almost a direct relationship there. The greater the economy is, it's putting more impacts on the Earth. We could look at resource use. This is going to be greenhouse gases. It's going to follow that economy as well. We could also look at things like habitat destruction. The whole world is connected. So changes like increases in greenhouse gases can cause high extinction rates. And those are going to be in areas where we have a lot of species.
So I hope you enjoyed Mr. Anderson and what he had to say about IPAT. One of the last things that I wanted to talk about was the gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is a measure of the value of all products and services produced in one year in one country. Well, what does that mean? It means that as the gross domestic product increases, you're also typically going to have an increase in resource. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. The human population doesn't have to utilize resources any longer in order to maintain the current population. And so what we need to start doing now is, as we know that as you have a decreased rate in the population growth, that the population continues to increase for a period of time. And so at this point, we need to start making some projections about where we want to stop that human population on our planet and where we think we can balance our resource use and maintain a reasonable lifestyle while at the same time using our resources in such a way that they can be replenished. And due to that expectation, we're going to have to make some changes because, as you saw, for instance, the United States has an amazing development, but we also have a huge resource use. And so we need to start transitioning our technologies from non-sustainable technologies to sustainable technologies. And that also is going to have to incorporate a change in human population growth. So we need to look at better education for women globally and family planning techniques that are going to be appropriate for each culture and each group of countries. So with those thoughts in mind, I'm going to let you brainstorm on how you're going to save the world. But today, why don't you just make some good choices about how you can encourage sustainability on our planet. Do something smart, like recycle, or buy your produce from a family farm. So just those little changes collectively can make a huge difference. With that being said, I'm going to let you continue your day by finishing the AP essay homework that we had talked about. You're going to have 10 more minutes to complete filling out or answering the AP question the other group provided to you. And then once that's done, they're going to give you their rubric. And as a group, I would like you to grade the essay and figure out how you did. Then I'd like you to explain your answer and how you graded yourself to the rest of the class, if you have time. Don't forget, next class is an exam on Chapter 6 and 7. Good luck.